And welcome back. So I'm going to try to put all of this together for you now in a way that allows you to really sit with a diabetic patient and have a kind of consultation with them that would be meaningful. So the thing to keep in mind again is that diabetic patients already have dietitians often that are looking after them, regional diabetic centers that they're reporting to and being monitored at those locations, and they have foot doctors looking at them, diabetic specialists, their attending physician. So they have a lot of information. They've been given guidance before. This is not the first time. The problem has been over the years, in my view, that many diabetic patients are not as compliant with the diet and lifestyle recommendations as they ought to be. And a lot of the emphasis moves more towards drug involvement and trying to keep their glycemic levels down and manage things, usually often using more pharmaceuticals and giving the person, a little more slack on the diet and lifestyle, and when in fact the emphasis should really be diet and lifestyle first. And someone needs to hold them a little more accountable. The other thing is that, relative to the amount of activity that many of these people do, they eat too many carbohydrates. They have too many carbohydrate calories in their body. Now, if they're a high-level athlete or they're training in a serious way, then they're going to need more carbohydrates. Everyone realizes that. But the day-to-day diabetics that often you see in practice are not exercising enough. They're not moving their body enough. So this higher intake of carbohydrate puts their blood sugar into a range that's too high. They think it's okay because it's lower than it used to be, but sometimes it's still 6.4, 6.5, and 7.2, and numbers that are really shockingly high sometimes. That for someone who's not a diabetic, you look at that and say, well, these numbers eventually are going to get you in trouble. So this, I think, is helpful advice when you're dealing with the diabetic patient. So what you want are dietary modifications that will help to lower blood glucose and also lipid levels. You want the cholesterol and triglyceride levels down as well. And so to do that, they need to be on foods that don't have a lot of saturated fat and trans fats, and they have to avoid eating deep fried foods and foods that are breaded, and be very careful with pastries and relying on more lower glycemic carbs as much as possible as their main carbohydrate sources. So some examples of how to do this, to include lower glycemic carbohydrate foods and avoid high glycemic carbs, include the following. I tell the patient, try to replace the starchy carbs, the bread, pasta, the rice, and the potatoes, with beans and peas as much as possible. And if they have to choose a starchy carb, I would say have rice, especially a whole grain rice or a brown rice, to try, because it has a lower glycemic index. And then where possible, you want them to add artichokes to vegetables or to legumes, a bean salad, let's say, 2 or 3 times a week, to get that effect of artichoke on reducing cholesterol levels and possibly even glucose levels. And if they're not accustomed to using soy based or vegetable protein products, then I try to introduce them to tofu and textured vegetable protein, which they can use in meat sauces and cabbage rolls as an example, and to use soy-based veggie burgers and other soy products, to try to have them at least 3 times a week, as soybeans and soy protein products help to lower glucose and cholesterol when they're used in place of animal protein foods. So this is a big step for them to often move towards the sort of soy and textured vegetable protein as a meat substitute, and to have veggie burgers instead of hamburgers and even chicken burgers. The idea is to try to get more of that vegetable matter into their system that contains the kinds of nutrients and fiber that can help to keep their cholesterol down and slow the absorption of glucose into the bloodstream. And to choose lower glycemic vegetables in place of higher glycemic vegetables. So lower glycemic vegetables are the cruciferous vegetables: broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, bok choy, turnips. And these are ones that also help to reduce cancer in a very big way. Remember that diabetics have a greater incidence of cancer just because their insulin levels are higher. So getting more anti-cancer vegetables makes a lot of sense. And also to try to get more green leafy vegetables into their diet, and tomatoes and onions, cucumbers, zucchini, and so on. The higher glycemic vegetables include carrots, yams, sweet potatoes, even regular potatoes, squash. And I try to get them to use vinegar, in the salads that they make. Whether it's a vegetable salad or a bean salad, to try to use vinegar with olive oil, extra virgin olive oil. And of course, the vinegar is slowing the carbohydrate absorption, decreasing the glycemic index of a whole bunch of foods. So we saw that in the earlier research. Choose lower glycemic fruits in place of higher glycemic fruits. So lower glycemic fruits include apples, peaches, pears, plums, cantaloupe, honeydew melon, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, mango, and strawberries. So, you're not going to take all the fruit away from them, but you want to try to have them have fruits that are not going to create such a big blood sugar spike, of course. So the ones that are a little sweeter are things like grapes and watermelon, apricots, pineapple. And I encourage them not to drink juices other than 4 ounces of pomegranate juice a day, because pomegranate juice is so strongly linked to cancer prevention that I'm okay with 4 ounces of pomegranate juice a day. And try to get them not to have the fruit but not have the fruit juice. And not to add fruit or fruit juices to a protein shake, as they're sometimes tempted to do. They get excited about whey protein in the morning, then they want to know what they can add to it to make it this fantastic smoothie. I'm thinking, no, keep those things out of there. For breakfast, consider oatmeal or low-fat plain yogurt mixed with some high-fiber, low-sugar breakfast cereal, or an egg white omelet with vegetables, or of course a whey protein shake that's low in sugars and fat, and mixed with water and ground flaxseed, possibly adding creatine monohydrate to that, as we spoke about, as a regular breakfast option. So I try to get those diabetic patients to switch as much as I can to a whey protein shake for breakfast, adding ground flaxseed. They have it with water, ice cubes, creatine, and you'd be shocked at just how quickly that can help to bring their body weight down and get their glycemic blood values under control, both their hemoglobin A1C and also their blood sugar level. And I have them not drink sweetened almond milk and sweetened soy milk and chocolate milk and other sweetened milks and milk substitute beverages. And don't have drinks that are sweetened with sugar or any form of carbohydrates. So all these different, Coke and Pepsi and Mountain Dew, and of course these things are off the list. And I have them not add sugar to tea or coffee. If using a higher protein diet, so if you're going to switch into this higher protein diet that we looked at earlier, then try to make the sources of protein chicken breast, turkey breast, Cornish hen, low-fat yogurt, soy-based products, textured vegetable protein, and so on, tofu, veggie burgers, egg whites, fish, as a means to prevent atherosclerosis, so you don't raise cholesterol levels, and also to reduce the iron load, because that excess iron can generate free radicals and we think cause further damage to the kidneys. And of course, you want them to get more dietary fiber, particularly the soluble fiber that slows down the absorption of carbohydrates into the bloodstream. And that same kind of fiber also helps to drag cholesterol and bile acids out through the fecal route. So this is why this half a cup of beans 3 times a week, especially red kidney beans and chickpeas. That's where most of the research has been done, with red kidney beans and or chickpeas. Chickpeas are also called garbanzo beans. And ingesting more soy products, they have the same effect, slowing the glucose absorption and also reducing cholesterol levels. Or half a cup of any other beans and peas. All beans and peas are excellent. And of course, oat bran and oat bran cereals have a cholesterol lowering effect and very low glycemic if you choose the right products. Adding that heaping tablespoon of ground flaxseed to the morning shake or put it into yogurt as well also helps to give you more soluble fiber to lower cholesterol, as does psyllium husk fiber, which lowers cholesterol and slows down the absorption of glucose into the bloodstream. So, and there's that product called PGX in the marketplace that people add to their foods, and that also helps to lower the glycemic index of many food sources. And then with respect to exercise, you want to get the person to work up to a minimum of 30 minutes of exercise at least 5 times a week, endurance exercise, at whatever intensity the patient is capable of achieving. Now, in many cases, this might just be starting with sort of walking briskly to start with. Maybe they can't run or use an elliptical machine or get on a stationary bike. A lot of these people are very out of shape. So if you just get them walking to start with, and you work it up to 30 minutes a day, and you want them to be walking as if they're late for a very important meeting. That should be the intensity, just to make it simple for them. So they say you should work out at an intensity where you could have a conversation and still talk, but you can't sing because it'd be too hard to sing because there's some cardiorespiratory challenge. And this harkens back to the work of Nathan Pritikin, who really impressed me. This was the reason why I pursued a second career in the area of nutrition, as I read his book back in the late 1970s, early 80s, called The Pritikin Diet and Lifestyle Program. And Nathan Pritikin was the first person to show you could take these type 2 diabetics and people who are type 2 diabetics who had moved to type 1 diabetes and now were on insulin, and you could reverse the diabetic condition just through the kinds of dietary things we're talking about here, and getting them to do roving 5 to 7 days a week. And roving was finding a 3-mile course, or roughly a 4.8 kilometer course, and to sort of jog, and then when you got tired you would walk, then you jog again, then you walk, then you jog, and then you walk. And so you would run for as long as you could, and then when you got tired you would walk, and while you would recover, and once you recover sufficiently then you start running again. And as people's cardiorespiratory fitness improved, eventually most people could run the whole 4.8 kilometers or the whole 3 miles. But they didn't start out that way. So the idea was that sort of 4.8 kilometer course, and someone who's walking it very briskly, they could usually walk it in about 40 to 45 minutes. And then as you start to run and walk and run and walk and run and walk, most people could do that in roughly 35 minutes. And then once you can jog the whole thing, well, most people are able to do that in 30 minutes or less. So that really was what he focused on in terms of the exercise program, and he got tremendous results with that. But again, anything you can get the person doing for 30 minutes minimum 5 times a week is an endurance activity is going to help to burn carbs, improve insulin sensitivity, and to lower triglycerides in their bloodstream, and improve their cardiorespiratory fitness, strengthen their heart, help to lower their blood pressure. It's multimodal, of course. And then if and when you can add strength training, depending upon the person's physical status and how far along they are in sort of the wellness journey, it's great to introduce it. It increases lean mass. With more lean mass, you burn more calories at rest. It's easier to get your body fat down. It improves insulin sensitivity, and helps to make for a more functional body in general. And then when it comes to supplements, if we can just sort of broach this again and summarize what we've been talking about. If you're going to use supplements in these cases, it's vitally important that you understand the person's kidney and liver function. So you can't proceed giving diabetic supplements unless you've seen their lab work. And let's assume that their liver function is good or reasonably good, and that there's no major liver function tests that are a red flag. Then these are the main supplements to start with, in my opinion. That would be a high potency multiple vitamin and mineral, because it will have the antioxidants, the vitamin C and the vitamin E that we have seen are important for increased insulin sensitivity and help to prevent free radical damage in the lens of the eye and also in the back of the eye relative to macular degeneration risk. And then the B vitamins, of course, multi-purpose, but also keeping the homocysteine levels down. Remember that most diabetics die from cardiovascular disease. Then the 500 milligrams of calcium helping with insulin release and helping to keep parathyroid hormone down. And the same with vitamin D, which has all these multimodal effects, increasing insulin secretion, increasing insulin sensitivity, regulating the immune system, helping to keep parathyroid hormone down so you don't end up with insulin resistance. And of course, a multivitamin would have some chromium and some zinc. The eye needs zinc. And of course, you need copper if you're going to put zinc in so you don't develop anemia. And a high-potency multiple vitamin, like the one I was describing during this course, also will have some lutein powder, which of course will go to the back of the eye and be an antioxidant in the macula lutea to help protect the optic disc and from free radical damage, because diabetics are very prone to oxidative stress in the eye area. And then that combination of chromium and hydroxycitric acid and these green tea catechins, decaffeinated green tea catechins, working together to improve insulin sensitivity and to increase lean mass and to decrease the conversion of carbohydrate into fat and to turn on thermogenesis and even reducing with catechins, even reducing blood glucose and lipids to some degree. I like that supplement combination a lot, as well as giving them essential fatty acids just to make the blood a little less sticky. Diabetics tend to have very sticky blood, and to cause vasodilation and reduce the inflammatory effects throughout their systemic system, because with diabetes you get systemic low-grade inflammation. And then the whey protein breakfast shake that we talked about, and I like adding creatine, 2 teaspoons to that of creatine, that'd be 10 grams, of course with a heaping tablespoon of ground flaxseed. This is something else I try to encourage them to do. And also, what's really a little bit new is this cinnamon, 1,000 milligrams 3 times a day. So these are results we've seen lately with cinnamon supplementation. I have found to be quite impressive, actually. And then you want to, as you're looking at their lab work, you want to look, do you know what their blood vitamin D is? If you don't know, you need to get those results done to make sure that their blood vitamin D level is above 85 nanomoles per liter, because vitamin D has all these multimodal effects. And if their vitamin D level is below 85, then you might want to give them, there's already 1,000 IUs of vitamin D in the multi. You might want to give them another 1,000 to 3,000 IUs a day to try to get them up to a more ideal level over the ensuing 6 months. And then once it gets into that range, you can sometimes back the vitamin D down to maybe 2,000 IUs a day total. And if they have elevated cholesterol and or triglycerides, and you've applied your nutrition approach and your exercise approach quite aggressively and they're adhering to it, you should see their cholesterol and triglycerides come down. If they come down into the ideal range, then there's nothing else you need to do. But if you're not seeing an LDL cholesterol at or below 1.8 millimoles per liter, or a triglyceride level at or below 1.5 millimoles per liter, then this is the time to start introducing gum google and artichoke leaf extract. That supplement from Adiva is called Coliforte, that has that combination. I showed you that earlier. That's something to consider, or a product that's similar to that with similar ingredients. And then if they have established macular degeneration already, then you might want to add an additional vision-based supplement that contains high amounts of lutein and zeaxanthin that you can find in health food stores and some drug stores today. Some other considerations, if there is some decline in kidney function, and you think that maybe you can slow it down, so you want to, by just improving their glycemic control, it's going to help, and keeping their cholesterol down, that's going to help. But if you want to try a supplement, then giving them glutathione precursors that contain alpha lipoic acid and N-acetylcysteine and milk thistle that has silymarin and L-glutamine to raise glutathione levels. It's worth considering. So the Adiva product that has those agents in it is called Ultimate GLX, but you can find similar formulations in the marketplace under other brands. So you might already be familiar with a company that makes a product like this. It could be tried in this situation, but again, the kidney monitoring of the estimated glomerular filtration rate, the EGFR, and the creatinine have to be looked at very carefully over the ensuing weeks to make sure that you're doing good and not harm. If those numbers start to deteriorate, if the EGFR starts to decline and the creatinine starts to rise after you make this introduction of these nutrients, then you need to get the patient off those supplements immediately. And with quercetin, if there's cataracts that are forming and you want to try to slow down the formation of the cataract, and it's worth, I think, trying quercetin at 100 to 400 milligrams a couple of times a day. And bitter melon, there's some good evidence for it. I have not used it, but others have, and I think it's just worth knowing about. You may want to apply that to help improve glycemic control. And then the last thing that I'll point out here is that if the patient's over the age of 45, then I do try to introduce them to a supplement that contains coenzyme Q10, hawthorn, and a little bit of quercetin. So under the Adiva label, that's a product called Cardio Essentials. And just because as people get older, their coenzyme Q10 levels drop off. So we've seen this in the course called Theories of Aging. We saw it in the cardiovascular disease subject matter as well. And as CoQ10 drops off, it becomes harder for the heart muscle to generate energy, so congestive heart failure becomes a consequence over time. And so because diabetics are very prone to cardiovascular problems, then I like to have this product administered to someone over the age of 45 if they'll take it, to help guard against that. And of course the hawthorn works synergistically with coenzyme Q10, but in diabetic patients they have done studies where they've given them coenzyme Q10 and it's improved endothelial function. It improves the blood vessel dilation, more nitric oxide, more blood flow even to the heart muscle itself. So, and hawthorn has shown similar effects in other studies to improve endothelial function and more circulation through the coronary arteries. So I like those effects. I like the anti-blood vessel inflammation effect of quercetin and also the effect of quercetin on the eyes. So this is another supplement that I tend to recommend to a diabetic who's over the age of 45 years old. And remember that some of these diabetic patients, because they have higher cholesterol, are sometimes put on statin drugs to lower their cholesterol, which is also blocking the synthesis of coenzyme Q10. So this is another reason to consider CoQ10 supplement in these patients. Now, keeping in mind that statin drugs can actually make the diabetic condition worse, so that doctors don't like to use statin drugs in diabetic patients because it can trigger diabetes, and it can often cause diabetes to deteriorate or to worsen with the introduction of Lipitor, Crestor, or statin drugs. So doctors try not to use that. And that's why soluble dietary fiber and beans and peas and ground flaxseed and soy products and gum google and artichoke leaf extract, these things can be so beneficial in lowering the lipid levels to spare the patient having to use a statin drug, which will very often worsen their diabetic condition in other ways. So that takes us, I believe, to the end of this section. One last really important slide. And that is about interprofessional communication. So how do you approach the diabetic patient if you are a complementary practitioner? So you're not a medical doctor, but you're now taking on a diabetic patient as a client or as a patient to give them nutritional medicine management. These are the things you have to be aware of. First of all, be aware of the patient's medications. So you need to know the whole list of medications that they have. And the primary health practitioners managing their case. You need to understand who's managing their diabetic case on the medical side. They're often also attending regional diabetic centers where there's diabetic nurses who are very, very up to date on diabetic care. There's foot specialists there. There are dietitians who are seeing these people. You need to know who that whole medical health team is comprised of. And is the family doctor involved? Is there an endocrinologist involved or a diabetic specialist? Who is that medical health management team? And you need to know what medications they're taking. And in the course on this platform called Essentials of Pharmacology, we'll spend more time so you have a better understanding of the diabetic drugs. But for the time being, just know that you have got to understand what medications they're taking, the dosages, and what the intent is of those drugs before you do anything. You also need to be aware of the existing patient program recommendations. What specific dietary recommendations has been issued to this person, and how well are they complying with the dietary interventions that they have been given by the dietitian or diabetic specialist? And what meds are they taking? We said that. And what exercise are they doing? What exercise was prescribed versus what are they actually doing? Because I'm sure that someone along the way told them they need to be more physically active. But are they doing it, and what are they doing? How often are they doing? What's the frequency? What's the intensity? And who's monitoring them? Who's actually holding their hand to the fire to make sure it gets done? Then you want to make sure you've seen their lab work, especially to look at kidney function, liver function, as well as, of course, glucose, triglycerides, cholesterol, hemoglobin A1C, and also urinalysis and everything in between. You want to actually see the lab work for yourself. You can't just take the patient's word for the fact that things are getting better. My doctor says my lab work's pretty good right now. I'm monitoring my blood sugar at home, and I'm doing better. You need to actually see the numbers before you actually wade into the waters with this patient. And one thing to keep in mind is that when the doctor does the person's blood work, they're doing venous blood, right? They're drawing venous blood. When the person's doing a little lancet at home to look at their blood sugar, they're looking at arterial blood. So the arterial blood, when you're looking at glucose levels, the arterial blood level is always going to be a little higher than the venous blood level, because the glucose that's in the arterial blood is still going through the system, and it can still be picked up by different cells along the way before it enters the venous system. Once you have blood glucose that's in the venous system, then all the glucose that was going to be extracted by the cells has already occurred. And so the arterial tests for glucose is always going to be a little higher than the venous blood. So when a doctor does that venous blood draw in a lab and gives the person their fasting glucose level or their glucose tolerance values and so on after a glucose load, that's looking at the numbers you're going to see in a lab sheet. What the patient's doing at home when they're tracking their own blood work using a glucometer, and they're just doing a lancet and then putting some of the blood on the strip, and then the strip tells them what their blood glucose is. That's the arterial blood. And so those numbers are always going to creep up and be just slightly higher than if you were getting true venous blood readings, just to keep that in mind. You also want to include the patient's health team in your recommendations so that everyone is aware of your intentions, and you want to provide the supporting research. Where complementary health practitioners have got themselves in trouble in the past is by taking a diabetic patient and then working with them in this little vacuum, in this little sequestered area, without communicating with the rest of the diabetic health team. They take this patient and put them on, let's say, a very low glycemic diet, a ketogenic diet, a high protein diet with hardly any carbs. And the diabetic medical health team isn't aware of this. And so they've prescribed drugs, or they put the person on insulin at doses that are conducive to the nutrition plan that they had given the person, and how well the person's been complying with that. And then all of a sudden they make this drastic change, and the medical health team has no knowledge of it. And now the person becomes severely hypoglycemic, and they're in serious trouble. And then when they report back to the diabetic team and they do their follow-up work, they go, "Oh my God, you're hypoglycemic, you're in ketosis, and you're dizzy, and you could fall down and fracture a bone." I mean, I went to see this practitioner over here who put me on this program. If you're going to alter the diabetic management program in any way from how the medical health team has been managing it, You need to create a report that explains it, provide it to the patient, and provide the supporting research for what you're doing. And I've given you a lot of the references here that you can use. And then you need to, either by email or fax or by snail mail, you need to send that information to the attending physician, to the diabetic regional group that's looking after this individual, or the diabetic specialist, whoever it is who's in charge of the person's medical management of their diabetes. You need to send a report or a number of reports, maybe to all these different groups, to make sure they understand what it is you're intending to do, and that the patient has documentation to explain what it is you want them to do and why, and for them to only start into this adherence to the new recommendations you're making, once all the medical team has been informed. And that's not only how you protect yourself, but you protect the patient from having some undue or untoward side effect where they become hypoglycemic and they can get themselves into some serious trouble. So that's sort of the interprofessional communication that's expected of you if you're going to take on a patient that has a diabetic condition. So that takes us to the end of this section. I hope this was helpful. Thank you very much for watching.